Hey guys, what's happening? Thanks for tuning in, coming back and hanging out, all that stuff. I appreciate it. And if you're new here, my name is Jim. Thanks for watching. I make tutorial videos showing you how to use different software products to adjust your images, make changes to your images, have fun with your images, get creative with your images, all that kind of stuff. It's all about the image. So today I'm in Luminar 4 and I'm playing around with a landscape and I'm using luminosity masks to enhance that landscape. So let me show you the photo. Here it is, and this is the Grand Tetons in Wyoming. Absolutely beautiful. But landscapes are a great place, or type of photo, I guess, a subject, whatever. You know what I'm saying. Landscapes often benefit from the use of luminosity masks. I used to always shoot brackets in HDR brackets because what I was trying to do is balance out the light, and I was trying to make sure that the brighter part, which is going to be the sky in this photo, and the darker part, which is going to be some of this foreground on the right, as well as the center section with the mountains, I was trying to always balance out the light. So I fired brackets here, but these days I don't create as many HDRs. I'm often just using a single exposure because I pretty much have enough to work with. And luminosity masks are super powerful because they let you isolate the bright parts and the dark parts and edit them differently. And that's kind of what you're trying to do with HDR. Now, when I first started doing photography and started getting into it, and I would see people talk about using luminosity masks, I was always just like, kind of scared, like, oh my God, I can't even imagine doing that. It seems so hard and confusing, and what the heck are you talking about? But it's quite simple, especially in Luminar. It builds it for you automatically, and it does a really good job. So let me show you the before photo, which is the one you're looking at, and the after photo. And what I'm going for here, and by the way, I see that spot over here. I think there's a couple other spots. I'll take that out, just not in this video. I just want to focus on the editing, not the correcting, if you will. But the luminosity mask gives you amazing control over the light parts and the darker parts and lets me make my edits selectively. So I'm going to walk through how I use those on landscapes and talk about the why and that sort of thing. So let me hit reset and we'll jump into it. Okay, here's my base photo and I'm on the base layer, and that's the other thing we're going to do. I use luminosity masks with layers because, again, it's about isolation, and isolating pieces of or parts or sections of the photo is what layers is really all about for me most of the time, not all the time. But let's get into it. The base layer, the first thing I look at is like I want to do some basic stuff in the light tool, and that's where I start. So I'm going to put the temperature over here to like something like that. I don't know, something like that. I'm just kind of warming it up a little bit, and tint is fine. I add some smart contrast of about 19. I'll be checking my notes throughout this. Highlights, I'm bringing down, and it's quite obvious the highlights are pretty bright. Again, this is one exposure from a bracketed set, but I think, especially if you look at the base photo, it represents what you'll often see, which is obviously the sky is brighter. That's going to be the brighter part of the photo. The landmass is darker. That's going to be the darker part of the photo. That's why people use filters. That's why people use HDR techniques. That's why people use luminosity masks, because they're trying to balance out those tones to get an even distribution of light. And that's what we're doing here. Shadows, I'm going to bump that up to about 24. And yeah, so there we go. There's my base photo and my current state, a long way from finished. Actually, at this point, I was like, I don't really like it. I better keep experimenting. So that's when I said, I'm going to use some luminosity masks. So you go to the layers panel, add a new layer, and it's a new adjustment layer. And what we're going to do is go make some edits to the photo. The first thing I like to do is, as I said, I kind of want to isolate these. And this layer is going to be about the sky and the water. So I'm going to click rename, and I'm going to call this sky and water. And I like to rename my layers, especially when I have multiple layers, because it helps me keep track of what the heck it is. Now, you will see when you apply a luminosity mask that you can kind of see the luminosity mask. It has a little icon over here that shows you the mask. So visually, you'll have a cue as to what parts of the photo are being affected. But regardless, naming them is a good idea. So now that I've created the layer and named it, let's get into the edits. Let's see, I'm going to start here in highlights, and I'm going to bring those down. Now, again, I'm currently adjusting the photo, and since I have not applied any mask, it's going to adjust the whole photo. However, while I'm doing my edit, I'm thinking and looking at the sky and the water because that's all I care about, because that's what this layer is going to be about. You will notice the layer name shows up here as well. So I'm applying things globally. We're going to adjust that with the luminosity mask. Some of you may say, Jim, why don't you just put the mask in first and then adjust? it works quite well to do that. And in fact, that may be a better way to do it. I'm doing it this way because what I want to do is show you all the edits globally and then show you how different it looks once I apply the mask. So edit how you see fit. That's how I'm doing it in this one. So next up is AI structure, and I'm bringing that down to about a -30. What that does, it smooths out some of the detail and it softens things up. Again, sky and water. I personally like skies and water to be pretty smooth. I'm doing that here. Color, I'm going to say about a 5 on saturation and about a 25 or 26 or something like that on vibrance. Again, sky and water. The green looks terrible. I don't really care. I'm not paying attention to it. Next, I'm going to go here into the advanced settings, and I'm going to go into orange, and I'm going to take the saturation level up to about a 17. I'm going to go into yellow and do something similar, about a 10 or 12. Again, I'm popping the color in the sky, which also reflects in the water. Next, I'm going to go to blue. There's a whole lot of blue in this photo, and so I'm going to bring that saturation up, and I'm going to like a 37. So that's a lot. The mountains are turning really blue. I don't care. I'm not going to be editing the mountains. Remember, this luminosity mask layer, this layer, once I apply the luminosity mask, is just going to be for the sky and the water. I'm going to bring the luminance of that blue down. In other words, I'm going to darken it. So I made it more blue, more saturated, but darker. And then I'm going to go down here to Landscape Enhancer and get Golden Hour and go to about 15 or something like that. So there we go. Let me check my notes. I just want to read all that. Yeah, I got it. So now, here we go. We're going to apply a luminosity mask. So edit mask, and all you do is you click luminosity mask. Now, if you don't know what a luminosity mask is, I probably should have started the video by saying that. I've talked about them before. If you've been here long enough, you probably know what they are. But for those of you that aren't familiar, it's basically a mask that varies its intensity based on the light levels. So it's a mask built around light levels. And so the brighter parts of the photo get a more intense mask. In other words, more of the edit that I've just done will show up in the brighter parts, and the darker parts get a less intense application of it. In other words, and here it's going to be the land and the shadow and the mountains and things like that get less of it. And that's why I'm using a luminosity mask. I'm basically trying to isolate the sky and the water, which are the brighter parts. And I'm going to hit luminosity. It will build that for you automatically in Luminar and then apply it to the photo. Okay, and there we go. And now these edits are applied more heavily to the brighter parts of the photo. Now, if you want to go look at or edit your luminosity mask, click on Edit Mask, click on Brush, and then I recommend clicking this little eyeball up there, which will show you the mask. Here's what a luminosity mask is. Heavier application of the edits where the darker red and pink color is shown. That's where more of the mask went, less of the mask in the lighter pink areas. Now I could come in here and say erase, and I could erase it completely across here. And in fact, maybe I'll just do that. I'll just completely erase the mask and any of those edits from these areas. I'm doing kind of a sloppy job, to be honest, but you can come in here and customize your mask if you want to, and that's one of the beauties of Luminar. Now, I recommend you take your time. I'm kind of hacking through that, but what I've done is applied a luminosity mask, so the edits I did are applying more heavily into the pink and red areas, which are the sky and the water primarily. And I've also just erased them completely from the grass and trees area. So you can see here, this is a visual representation. So remember, white, you can't really see it that well. It's really small. I wish you could enlarge that in Luminar, but white reveals and black conceals. You can kind of see the white here is applying in the sky and the water, and the black is applying in the land. By the way, when I did that edit mask and erase, it probably wouldn't hurt to also erase it from these mountains. It's your choice. Do whatever you want. But that's how a luminosity mask works. So now what I've done is I've created a luminosity mask for the sky and water, but now I want to go adjust the land. So I'm going to go and say new adjustment layer. And now I got to look at my notes again, and I'm going to go over here to Essentials and start making some edits that are going to apply once I set the mask up, are going to apply only to the landmass. So the first thing I do is I do AI accent, and I'm going to go about a 58 here. So that's pretty bright if you look at it. I mean, the whole photo is getting popped. And then AI structure, I'm going to do about a 55, which is also pretty heavy. Now keep in mind, I'm only really looking at the land. I'm not really paying attention to the sky and water. They're getting kind of jacked up, but that's okay, right? So I'm okay with it. Now I'm going into color, and here I go into green. So click on the green. I'm going to change the hue. I'm going to go this way to like a 64. Notice how the green got more kind of that richer green. That's because I changed the hue. I'm going to take the saturation down about a 15, and I'm going to take the luminance down because it's too bright, about a 25 or 26. So mostly I messed with the greens here so far. There's the before, right? You can see the greens, they're a little bit more yellow, and I just think they look better in this case being more green. And so that's what the hue shift did. And then I darkened it and took down the saturation a little bit as well. I'm now going to go into blue, and I'm going to take the blue saturation down fairly good amount, something like 38. And that right now, again, it's applying to the whole photo because I have not yet put a mask on this layer. But right now I'm just looking at the mountains. They were too blue. Let me show you the before, the color slider. If you look at the landmass, the mountains are kind of blue, and that kind of happens anyway, but I want to reduce that look a little bit. And then the grass is a little too yellow for me. I just don't really like it. So this color, this use of the color tool has helped me kind of control that a bit better. And now I'm going to go and apply a luminosity mask. Now there's two ways to do this. I can do what I did before, which is edit mask and hit luminosity, and it'll build it. And that's what I'm going to do. Or I could go to the sky and water layer. I could go into edit mask, and then I could copy the mask and then paint it here. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to go ahead and hit luminosity and let it apply across the photo. Okay, there it is. The luminosity mask has been applied. However, let me show you the mask. Edit mask, brush. Let me click the eyeball. It's the same mask as on the previous layer, except for the parts that I erased out, right? That was something I adjusted on the sky and water layer. Ooh, you know what? Hang on. I didn't name this layer, and I like to do that. So rename layer. I'm going to call this land. Well, two caps. I capitalized the A there, but regardless, let me go back to brush and show you that. Here's the thing. The luminosity mask defaults to applying more heavily to the bright parts and less heavily to the dark parts. But in this case, I want the opposite. So I'm actually going to go into mask and say invert, and it will actually flip the mask. There you go. Now the mask is applying heavily towards the landmass, including this section over here on the right, and less heavily in the sky and water, which is exactly what I want. So now you look at the edits, and it looks a lot better. So I'm going to say done, and let me show you the before and after. Let me turn this off. There's before, right? A bit darker, a little bit more blue in the mountains and that sort of thing. And after, a bit brighter, a little bit more balanced light, a little bit more structure, that sort of thing. And so that's a great way to control the look of your images. And by the way, there's the adjustment amount slider and blend modes, which would allow you to come in and do additional customizations. You can reduce that intensity. Let's say you like that, but you don't love it. You could take this down and say, well, maybe I like it at 70% instead of at 100. And you're just reducing the intensity of all the adjustments you made in the area where the luminosity mask is more heavily applied. In this case, the land, right? So I'm going to leave it at 100 because it doesn't, I think it looks fine. But keep that in mind. And also edit mask, brush, and showing you this one more time. If I wanted to, I could say erase, and I could erase it completely from the water. I'm not going to. It just depends on how custom and specific you want to be in your editing as to whether or not you feel like you should or feel like you need to adjust luminosity mask. I don't really feel like I need to. It's primarily covering that stuff. You know, it probably wouldn't hurt to erase it from there and there. You just hit erase, you make your brush size as big as you want, and you just wipe over it, right? Again, I'm not going to do it in this video, but it's very simple to come in and do those customizations. So now I've got my base layer, very simple edits just in the light tool. I've got my sky and water layer, simple edits applied globally, and then with the luminosity mask, they were specific to the sky and water, and I erased them from the land. And now this luminosity mask just to the land with some structure enhancements and color adjustments and light adjustments. applied with a luminosity mask, and then inverted. So now I'm not finished. I'm going to go and get a new adjustment layer. This time I'm going to remember to rename it. And this layer for me is all about touch-up. So I'm going to call it a touch-up layer. And again, it helps me keep things straight. When you have 3 extra layers on top of the base layer, it doesn't get real confusing. And like I said, you get this little visual cue here of what the luminosity mask looks like. So that will kind of tell you what it's being applied to. But I like to name them anyway. So I'm going to come over here to Essentials, and I got to look at my notes. So I'm going to start in Light, and I'm going to say like a -3 here, and maybe about a 15 or so on Tint. And then I'm going to come into Color, and I'm going to go into Yellow, and I'm going to take the hue to like a -50. Now, keep in mind, these are global adjustments. They're impacting the entire photo. And that's usually what I do with my touch-up edits. I have them after I've done my luminosity mask for sky and water, and then for the landmass, I come with that extra layer on top for touch-up, and I apply it globally. It's just kind of my preference. Doesn't mean you have to do it that way, but it's kind of the workflow that I've kind of gotten into that feels like it works for me. As I'm doing that, I'm making adjustments here to the yellow. So I took the hue to make it a bit more yellow. I took the saturation down, and I increased the luminance. Now I'm going to go to green, and I'm going to take the saturation down like a -25 or so, something like that. And I'm going to go to blue and take that saturation down a little bit as well, and that is like a -29. So just kind of reducing the impact of the color. I was trying not to overdo it. So there's the before, a little bit more colorful, and the after. In fact, I might give back a little bit of that. I kind of like my saturation, so I might give back a tiny bit of that in each of those just because I like my color. So there we go. Again, season to taste. Just do whatever you feel like you want to do. After that, I'm popping over here. I'm going to get Mystical, and this is going to be like a 30, 32, something like that. And I'm going to go next to get Orton, and that one's going to get low 20s, like 23, whoa, something like that. Just adding a little bit of moodiness. You will notice the Mystical and the Orton kind of add back a little bit of contrast and shadow. So even though I went through and did some brightening for the landmass, adding back shadow is kind of a natural thing I like to do. I think it makes the landscape look a little bit more natural, because I think visually you would expect to see a little bit more shadow. Even though you have dynamic range in your eye that's much better than the camera, I don't know, I just like a little bit of shadow and contrast. So again, it's season to taste, I guess, as I've said a few times. So now I'm going to do advanced contrast. And I have to be honest, here is complete experimentation. I did a deep dive video about advanced contrast, and there's no right way to do it. In fact, none of these filters have a right way. It's all season to taste and experiment. But in this case, I ended up with like a 30 or so in highlights contrast, similar in midtones contrast, and actually similar in shadows contrast. And again, that was just experimentation. I was just kind of playing around until I kind of got something that I liked. And then I went to adjustable gradient, and here I took the warmth down like a -10 in the top, and I took the warmth down like a -24 or something on the bottom, and that's really it. That's the workflow. So one thing I might do is go back to Landscape Enhancer and give it a little golden hour. That's a nice finishing touch on a sunset. I don't want to overdo it. Here's a thing that I noticed in this photo is the highlights are really bright up here. The reflected highlights are a little deeper and richer, so the color is showing up more there. So just be careful. Or if you're going to bump the golden hour a lot, something like that, you may want to come in here and erase it from the water. I'm not going to bump it that much. I'm just going to go something like 15 or 20 just to give it a little kick. And maybe I'll come up here to highlights and pull that down a tad as well, just a little bit. And even though I didn't do that in my previous edit, I find that every time I go back to a photo, I edit a little bit differently. I actually might come in here to color and blue and pull back that saturation just a tiny bit again. So again, it's experimentation, it's season to taste, but mostly what I wanted to talk about is how I approach luminosity masks with landscapes. I start with my base edits, which is really just a few simple things in the light tool. I separate any sky, and if water is present, I kind of group them together. You could do a different layer and a different luminosity mask for sky, and then water, and then land. Or you can do land first. It doesn't matter. I just happen to do it in that order. You could do land, and then sky, and then water. Your choice, but I separate and isolate those sections with a luminosity mask because the sky and water, again, are the brighter parts, so I knew a luminosity mask was going to target those pretty well. And with the land being the darker part, I knew a luminosity mask, which was then inverted, would target that area pretty well too. And then a touch-up is my final stuff, and that's really where I end the photo. So here's the before and the after, kind of a gentle, subtle landscape edit. And let me show you this sliding before and after. I mostly just wanted to bump up the colors a little bit of detail where I wanted it, which would be like in the mountains, and a little bit of smoothness in the water and the sky, and then a little bit of overall color pop and some contrast with a little bit of moody shadow thanks to Orton and Mystical on that touch-up layer. And that's it. Now, there's a dust spot over here I need to go remove. I think I may see another one or two. I think there's one over here, but I'll take care of that on my own time, not on yours. That's how I use luminosity masks on a landscape. A few tips and tricks for you. I hope that it helps, and thank you for watching, my dear friends. Have a great day. I'll see you really soon with a new video. Take care and adios.